Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Raj Sisodia. He is a thought leader in conscious capitalism. He's a professor of global business at Babson College. He is the co-chair and co-founder of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., the author of multiple books. Raj, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Happy to be with you today.
Yes, I'm delighted. And as I was just saying, before we came on air, I was interviewing a previous guest on the show, Kim Pullman. She's the founder of Reboot the Future. And on her desk before we went into the interview was the book, The Healing Organization. I recognized the name of the author because you're also the author of Conscious Capitalism, which when I read it was a huge inspiration on me. It was a huge inspiration for me. And so now having this chance to read The Healing Organization and to speak to you about it feels like a great honor. So,
always happy to talk about The Healing Organization.
Right. And before we get into that and some of the concepts and perhaps more importantly, the stories that you share in that book, tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you came to be in this position with this interest in conscious capitalism.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in India until the age of 7, and then we lived abroad for about 5 years in Barbados, California, and Canada, and went back to India when I was 12 and finished up my high school and then went off to do engineering because that's what you did if you happen to be good in math and science. You know, in those days, you didn't talk about purpose and what's your passion and all that. It's just like, how are you going to get a job, you know?
Right.
So you kind of get steered into engineering or medicine if you're good in biology or if you're good in math. And if not, you get a Bachelor of Arts and God help you, So get a government job, I suppose. So I ended up becoming an engineer, but I really had no passion for that. And then I went off to business school because the salary would be double and you get to work in an air-conditioned office. So I said, okay, that sounds better than this. So I did my MBA in Bombay. And I chose marketing because I didn't like finance. And then one day I'm coming down for breakfast and I see about 8 of my friends dressed up and going somewhere. And I said, where are you going? We don't have any classes today. I said, we're going to the US Information Agency to get GMAT applications for, and I said, why do you need that? We're already doing our MBA. They said, we want to apply for a PhD in business in the US. I said, wow, I didn't know you can get a PhD in business. So give me 5 minutes, I'll come with you as well, because I had lived in the US as a child and I wanted, I would have liked to come back if I could. So I did. And the irony is that I'm the only one from that group of 9 who ends up coming here and getting a PhD. And so I get a scholarship to Columbia in New York. And, I guess I'm going to be a professor now. That's just like life takes a turn, right? And there was no grand plan or vision for any of that. But as I became a marketing professor and academic and looked around to see what intrigued me as a research subject, the one thing that jumped out at me was just the sheer volume of marketing and the inauthenticity of much of it. That we were spending at one point $1 trillion on marketing in 2004. That is steady later. And that was the GDP of India that year. And I said, we're spending a lot of money. I mean, for 300 million people, the amount of money that 1 billion people are living on. And we're spending that on ads and coupons and junk mail and all this kind of stuff, this hype and hoopla around business. And I said, what are we getting for all that? And what are we getting for customers, for companies, and for society? And so that inquiry for about 10 years, was the primary focus of my research, looking at marketing efficiency and effectiveness and ethics. And concluding at the end of 10 years that it's a pretty bad situation. I mean, we're not doing well, we're spending more, getting less, worse outcomes. We may have a negative impact on society in terms of values, in terms of obesity, in terms of encouraging overconsumption of certain things. So it wasn't working for customers, wasn't working for companies, wasn't working for society. So I said there has to be a better way. So I did a book called Does Marketing Need Reform? And a conference on that theme. And then I embarked on what was going to be the magnum opus of everything that was going to be, everything wrong with marketing. Right? And I was calling it the shame of marketing. A phrase used by Peter Drucker to describe the consumer movement in America. He said, marketing's job is to look after the well-being of customers. If they have to organize against companies and they're not doing a job, that's a shame of marketing. So I was going to use that to basically make the case about how everything was wrong. And fortunately, I got good advice from my mentor. And he said, people would rather hear about the solution and not the problem. So do we have a solution to offer? And that simple insight kind of turned my thinking around. And I called it In Search of Marketing Excellence. And I said, let's find companies. Most companies spend a ton of money on marketing and get lousy outcomes. Customer loyalty and customer trust have plummeted, even as spending has skyrocketed. So there's something wrong there. So what's the opposite of that? Spend less and have tremendously loyal and trusting customers. And so we set out to look for those kinds of companies, and we found a handful of them. And as we started to look at how did they manage their marketing function, we found that it was almost an afterthought. They didn't really care about marketing as such. That Whole Foods was one of the companies. They didn't have an ad agency. They didn't have a chief marketing officer. They spent 90% less on marketing than their peers, but they took care of their customers and they had a values alignment with their customers, right? And so as we looked further to say, okay, what causes this to happen, we found that, well, the employees are also loyal and trusting, right? And the suppliers have a long-term relationship with these companies. Communities really embrace them. So all of their stakeholders are deeply connected to them and care about their well-being. So they care about the well-being of employees, customers, etc., and all of those stakeholders in turn care about the well-being of that company. And what binds them together are a set of values and a clear purpose. Whole Foods exists for a reason, not just to make money. It has to make money, of course, but it came into being in order to change the way we think about food and to change the way food is produced, right? That it matters what you put into your body. It matters to your health, the health of the food system, and the health of the planet as a whole. That's their guiding purpose. And that's what attracts um, customers and employees and investors and suppliers and others to be part of that company. Right, so purpose and shared values, kind of the glue that holds everybody together and then points them in the same direction. So all the stakeholders are now aligned, right? Because we have the share. If you don't have a shared purpose, then you're literally at cross purposes. Customers just want the lowest price, employees just want the highest pay and least work, investors just want the highest returns, society wants the highest taxes, and managers want the highest bonuses. Well, when you have a shared purpose, and everybody is sort of operating on the same side of the table, we're all kind of in it together, trying to figure out how to make the whole thing work better. So we discovered these principles of what we would later call conscious capitalism, the higher purpose, stakeholder mindset or integration of the well-being of all stakeholders. And it takes conscious leaders to do that. Leaders are not just about power and money, but they also care about the people and the purpose and a caring and a transparent, trusting culture. So those are the four pillars of conscious capital. So that book came out as Firms of Endearment in 2007. And we did the financial analysis at the end of our research. We found companies that fit this profile, where they had a sense of purpose and looked after all their stakeholders, etc. And we had 28 of those companies featured in the book. And then at the end, we did our financial analysis and fully expecting that these companies would perform okay, but not exceptionally, because they're not trying to profit maximize. They're trying to achieve their purpose and do it in a way that is good for the people. So we said, they pay their people better than their competitors, like Costco pays double of Walmart. They are investing in benefits at a higher level. They're taking care of their customer experience better. They are paying their suppliers better. They're not squeezing their suppliers. So suppliers can also be profitable and innovative. They're investing in their local communities. They're investing in the environment. And they're paying taxes at a higher rate. So we thought maybe there's less money left over at the end of the day for investors. And maybe that's okay if you look at the total value being created in that system. But actually, we found that these companies outperformed the market by a 9-to-1 ratio over a 10 period, right? So that became like, wow, it's not a choice between being good to people and the planet and all of that and making money, that the two go together very well if you have a cohesive, well thought out business that's rooted in the right things. So that kind of became an important discovery for me as well as for many people, and it kind of became the intellectual foundations for this conscious capitalism movement. And some of the companies featured in that book, like Whole Foods and Southwest Airlines and Container Store and Costco and so forth, have become some of the core companies and leaders that are part of this movement. And through that process, I kind of discovered my life purpose, because I was kind of this reluctant marketing professor. I kind of had almost a self-loathing about my own profession. You know,
It's a bit, have you had the Bill Hicks line, the stand-up comedian Bill Hicks, when he points to the audience and says, "Anybody in marketing, kill yourself, kill
oh my
yourself
God,
now." Right?
really? I didn't know that line.
Famous clip. Yeah.
Well, you know, my father got a PhD in plant science in cytogenetics. You know, and so my inner dialogue used to be that my father is trying to cure world hunger, and I'm trying to sell you some more potato chips.
Right.
Right. I mean, I didn't have this sense of nobility in my goal. But I remember the moment I discovered it when I was writing some of the stories of these companies and how moving those stories were and how deeply they cared about the employees and community and their families. And I literally had tears in my eyes as I'm sitting there trying to write. And I told my co-author, I said, David, I think my purpose just found me. I think this is what I want to devote the rest of my life to. I said, I've never had a positive emotional reaction to my work before. You know, when you have tears of joy connected to your work, you know, there's something special there, right? We often have tears of frustration or anger, but not joy. So that kind of guided me to my purpose, and that's really been for the last 15 years, you know, an amazing experience to be part of this movement.
Right. And I suppose what started as a quest to better understand how people market their companies became something much deeper about how do we organize our business lives, our organizations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we lead?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that led you to the Conscious Capitalism book and the movement, and that's where I first came across your work. So what's the evolution then from the ideas in Conscious Capitalism to what you're now exploring, this idea of the healing organization? What's the shift there?
Yeah, so I think it was, you know, it's a series of things that built. So that book came out in 2013, Conscious Capitalism, and then after that, I worked on a couple of other books that kind of became building blocks for the healing organization. So one was called Everybody Matters: The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, and I discovered a leader, Bob Chapman, and a company, Barry Waymiller, which in many ways is an exemplar of a healing organization. Bob buys distressed, dying companies, 108 of them at last. He's probably up to 120 by now, and all struggling and, you know, dying businesses, and he never sells them at all. I mean, he buys them and that's it. He's never sold a single company. And the same business that was struggling and dying in small industrial towns in Midwest United States, and now increasingly in Europe as well. The same company, same business, same people, it was struggling and now it's thriving because he goes in and changes the culture and changes the values and treats people with respect and dignity and care, right? And he keeps buying every year 10 to 15 more companies and turns them around. And you know, he does it. You know, I asked him at one point, Bob, I said, why do you keep buying so many companies? You know, you've got enough now, right? Like when do you say enough? When you have 26 grandchildren and 108 companies, the ratio seems out of whack, right? If you have more companies than grandchildren, maybe you should slow down. And he just said to me that, Raj, I don't know how much time I have left. And on my deathbed, I will not be proud of the money I made or the machines we built. I will be proud of the lives we touched. Right. And I want to touch as many lives as I can before I die. I want to improve. So I said, Bob, you're not growing a business, you're spreading a ministry. It's like a healing ministry, you know. When Bob Chapman comes to town, life gets better. Right? People have a future, people have hope. And you know, conversely, when a company like 3G Capital out of Brazil comes to town and they buy your company, they're going to lay off 20-30% of the people, and they're going to instill this and buy the numbers thing, and you know, it's just going to become like a rapidly moving treadmill and tremendous stress and pressure, and life gets very bleak and very hard when a different kind of buyer buys your company, right? So there's an energy of healing versus an empire building energy that pervades so much of business. So that book kind of primed me for these thoughts. And then I wrote another book called Shakti Leadership, which is about the feminine, integrating the feminine into leadership. Right? Because leadership has forever, I suppose, been an exclusively masculine energy dominated, male dominated as well as masculine energy dominated activity, right? And it's all about, you know, of course, strength, courage, focus, resilience, discipline, the positive, mature masculine qualities. But in the absence of the feminine, it becomes domination, aggression, hyper competition, winning at all costs. You know, business is war, everything is war, right? Sports is war is war, business is war, everything is a war. And that's just very toxic and creates a lot of suffering. right? So in that book, we talk about the rise of the feminine and how we need to incorporate more of that. Not only have more women, but also more feminine energy, even among men. Caring, compassion, empathy, inclusiveness, love, etc., forgiveness. Those are seen as feminine qualities, and that's what we need to integrate. So that's a kind of and that's a healing energy. That loving energy, etc. That's where healing comes from, and also the idea of becoming whole. Because when you are operating just as a half a human being with purely that side, because all of us have those two sides to us, right? But we just have suppressed those feminine qualities. That integrating those together makes you a whole person, and that heals you. The roots
Mm.
of healing are actually in wholeness
Yes.
and in holiness, right? So those ideas were kind of with me, and then eventually, and I also was using healing as an acronym for the qualities of a great purpose. I said every great purpose at some level needs to be a healing purpose. It's about reducing suffering and elevating joy and promoting healthy growth, and also stood for the qualities of it's heroic and evolving and aligning and loving, etc. So that's kind of the journey up to it, and then as we started to look at why this matters, if you look at the way we traditionally do business, what are the consequences of that on people? What is the human cost of doing business? You look at an income statement or a balance sheet, you won't see anywhere the human cost. The fact that heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays.
And have gone
Right?
down in the current crisis, right? With less
Of
people at
course,
work.
right now all bets are off, but the way we normally work, right, where 120,000 Americans are estimated to die every year from stress connected to work. Not the work itself, but the way we lead, manage, and organize. Right? When 600,000 Chinese die every year from overwork. This is what our capitalist business system is consuming in terms of human well-being, right, and causing a lot of suffering. When 87% of people are disengaged from their work worldwide, right, and then of course all the suffering we're causing to animals as well as to the environment. And so there's a huge amount of suffering, that's silent suffering for the most part, that's going on. There's a lot of financial distress. 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank. And these are people who are working full time, right? And they live with tremendous stress. So there's just traditional business causes enormous suffering. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to kill people to make money. And to the contrary, the more we can help people flourish and thrive and be filled with joy, the better our businesses are going to do. So that's kind of the purpose of that book, to show that.
Yeah. Yes, and the other thing you talked about with these other two energies, right? In the start of the book, you talk about the masculine, the feminine, the child, and the elder. Can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so these are the four energies that I think really define us as human beings, and they can be looked at in terms of what's within each of us, but also within our families, within our cultures, our communities, and companies as well. And the four energies, as you said, there's the masculine energy or the healthy father energy, there's the healthy mother energy, the mature feminine. There's also the elder energy, which is meaning and purpose and wisdom and legacy and thinking beyond your lifespan and beyond your immediate circle of influence. And then there's the child energy, which is joy and innocence and creativity, and playfulness and humor, right? And I think a healthy human being is a composite of all four of those, a whole human being. The phrase that my co-author on Shakti Leadership, Nilima, came up with, and we're actually going to write a book with this title next year probably. It's called The Wise Fool of Tough Love.
Okay.
Right? That the perfect human being and the perfect leader is, in fact, all of those qualities. They have wisdom, they have foolishness, in other words, playfulness, right? They are tough and they are loving. As Martin Luther King said, they're tough minded and tender hearted at the same time, which is the masculine, feminine. And you've got the wisdom and the joy, right? And if you look at a person like the Dalai Lama, I mean, to me, he embodies that, right? He's got tremendous wisdom. He's always giggling and, coming with a light heart, right? And of course, he's extremely strong and tough, but very, very loving and caring. So that's really the goal. And I believe all of us can get there in our own way. We can each be a unique, wise fool of tough love. My default tendency might be in one or two of those areas. In my case, I probably default more to the wisdom side and to the loving side, and maybe my toughness and the foolishness are not as well developed, but those need to be elevated. Once I'm aware of that, I can then cultivate those qualities, right? Because awareness and consciousness can then evolve in that way, so that ultimately I'm able to be all of that. And I can then show up with the right energy as needed. So, with the discernment to know what is needed, right? And then the flexibility to show up with that. So, in this situation calls for a light-heartedness, or this situation calls for some tough love, etc. And to be able to show up with that energy while being authentic to who you are. You're not acting, right? You're just revealing that side of your persona or your being. So that's really those four energies. And each of those can have a sort of a shadow side, right? We can have the hypermasculine, domination, aggression, right? We can have the hyperfeminine, sentimental and needy. We can have the sort of the negative elder energy, which would be sort of dogma and division, right? And we can also have unhealthy child energy, which could be sort of self-indulgent and adolescent. So we want to stay away from those lower manifestations of those four energies and stay in those upper reaches of those. And how do we cultivate practices around that?
Yeah, yeah. And you point in the book, which was fascinating to me, was in the founding of America, where there was a very strong focus on this masculine energy, which may have carried through to, I suppose, the capitalist system that we all look to for reference in America. But actually, there was a question at the time of whether they ought to be more influenced by the way that the tribal system there was operating amongst the Native Americans. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, this was kind of an interesting discovery for me. I didn't know about the Iroquois Confederacy, which had been operating for about 200 years by the time the founding fathers started to write the Constitution and design the structure of the U.S. government. And the Iroquois Confederacy consisted of 6 or 7 warring tribes in the northeast part of the United States and parts of Canada, which came together under a peacemaker 200 years prior and created a kind of a federated system where they had a sort of a joint leadership at the top, and then they allowed each of the tribes to have their own identity and leaders. And so that's kind of the two-tier system that the United States ultimately had, the 13 colonies and then the United States, right? And they had mechanisms to allow for sort of the blending of centralization versus decentralization. They had their version of a Supreme Court, the 3 branches, et cetera, et cetera. They had many of the elements, and these hadn't existed anywhere else in the world in history, as far as the founding fathers could find. And so when they finally found it right in their backyard, and they went to learn about that, and incorporated a lot of that into the United States system of government. But there was one key element which you noted, which is that there was a council of mothers and grandmothers, which actually selected the leader of the Confederacy. And that council could step in and replace that leader. The leader was too warlike, was not thinking about the well-being of everybody, not being inclusive, or not thinking long-term enough. Right? They have this philosophy of 7 generations. You're supposed to think about every decision in terms of its impact on the next 7 generations. So that was a way of bringing in that feminine perspective. Pretty
Essentially,
powerful.
and the elder perspective, right? The longer term view.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, of course, yeah. So these were grandmothers. You're right, grandmothers as well as mothers, right? And so and that, of course, was rejected out of hand because we had only founding fathers in this country. There was no founding mother. The closest we came was Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife. And she tried valiantly, and I think I quote some of those the correspondence between the two of them, which is, please, sir, do not forget the ladies as you design this, this new country and this new government. Because remember that men are wont to turn into tyrants. They're left to their own devices, right? And of course they laughed it off. And not only did women not get the right to vote for another 140 years, women could not own property, women could not inherit property. It was a complete sidelining of the feminine from the political as well as the economic realms of society, right? And that, I think, we paid a dear price for that, because there's a very violent sort of history in this country, and the continuation of slavery beyond where it should have, it should have died away much earlier. I mean, this is the only country that had to fight a war to end slavery, and all of the countries abolished it by decree. Right when the consciousness rose to a level, they said, "My God, how is this? It's an acceptable practice for civilized human beings." But the United States fought the bloodiest war it has ever fought to end that. So I think it was that hyper masculine. This is a hyper masculine energies of the DNA of this country. We've still not had a woman president, for example, right? Which is shocking. I mean, it's the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote this year. So I think that's some of the historical backdrop. And I think in capitalism as well, I point out that, Adam Smith is the father of modern capitalism, right? The market system and how that works with the wealth of nations. But he also wrote the theory of moral sentiments, which was about the human need to care, that we have a need to care for each other and care, without regard to self-interest. And these are parallel things that we have. We have self-interest, but we also have the need to care. So the way I say it is that capitalism had a mother and a father, and they were both Adam Smith. But we rejected the mother energy that was in theory of moral sentiments, because what we do is we take our mothers for granted, and we always are trying to emulate our fathers because they're out there in the world achieving worldly things, and we take the human things for granted. And I think that's what our time now is sort of a return. And I was just reading an article this morning by Aviva Wittenberg Cox about the countries that have really managed the current crisis the best are all led by women. There's 7 countries: Germany, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland, New Zealand, and Taiwan. And they're all led by women, and they all took bold, decisive, loving action early on. And they're all of them are, with sort of tiny numbers, in terms of deaths and so forth, right? So there's something in that quality, and those feminine qualities which have been lacking and missing in the world of business. That's really what, and in politics, for that matter, that's what's really sorely needed. It's a blend of both, healthy masculine, healthy feminine, all of those energies.
Yeah, that's right. It's the balance, because I think we're seeing a lot of vilification of masculine energy right now.
Oh no, that's we need that too. We need the healthy masculine. We need courage, resilience, focus, discipline. We need structure, right? That's a whole human being. In India we have gods to depict everything, right? So there's a god that we have in India called the Ardhanareshwar, which is half male, half female. So if you look at the illustrations, you'll see on this side is like Shiva, which is masculine, and it's powerful and strong. And then on the other side, you have the grace and the beauty and the feminine.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of a depiction of we're all born with these separate genders and identities, but we are evolving in our lifetimes and beyond towards wholeness.
Yeah.
And that wholeness is that integration.
That integration of the energies. And it's that could be a metaphor then for stakeholder capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Is this balancing of these needs?
Yeah, it's inclusive, and it integrates all of these. Because we know that the absence of any one of them is ultimately going to bring down the whole, right? Because it is a system. And if you don't pay attention to every component of a system, ultimately the whole system cannot function.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so in the book, then you go on to describe several cases of examples of healing organizations. If you had to pick a few, which would you select to illustrate this new way?
Oh, yeah, we have about 20 plus stories, I think, in the book.
That's right.
And I think that's really the heart of the book, are the stories. And if I had to pick a couple, I think one would be Apple Tree Answers, the story that we called, what do we call, the parable of the pothole, right? And that's the idea that most businesses have kind of these 2 classes of employees. They have sort of the managers and the executives, college educated, professional, salaried, benefits, leadership development program, all that stuff that we do. And then you've got probably 80-90% of the people who actually do the work, right? The front line, if you will. Mostly paid hourly in the US. without much benefits, with very little security, and not paid very well, not treated very well, and high levels of turnover, low levels of engagement, and a tough life. So this company is Apple Tree Answers, which is a call center company. And when John Ratliff started one of these, and then he bought a whole bunch of others and kind of rolled up into a second largest call center company in the US and started to look more formally at some of these kinds of things. And he was shocked that the employee turnover, there's one average number, but then if you look at it by the hourly versus the salaried, it's very different. Right? The turnover was 118% for the hourly people. It was only in the teens for the salaried. And engagement was the opposite. Engagement was pretty high for the salaried and very, very low in the teens for the hourly. So he said, wow, it's a whole different experience that people have at this company. And how can I improve that? How can I reduce the turnover? How can I make their life better? So I started to really listen and observe what they were doing. And and started to do some basic things like just asking people, what can we do to make your life better every day? Tell us something. So the chairs were causing backache, so they replaced the chairs and things like that. But then he also discovered, of course, that people are living at the edge, because if they only have a few $100s in the bank and something happens in their life, suddenly they could be out on the street. They could lose their home. They could lose their car. A kid gets sick and you don't have insurance, so your car breaks. So the way we illustrate that is by imagining that what if the chief financial officer is driving to the office one day and her car hits a pothole, her Mercedes, and blows out the tire, damages the rim. So she calls the AAA, and they come and tow the car away to the Mercedes dealer, and then she gets a lift to her office and gets there about an hour late, and everybody's very solicitous of her and say, are you okay? That must have been so scary, what you just had to go through. And that afternoon, the car is delivered, it's washed, it's cleaned, it's repaired, and insurance covered most of what she had to pay. So this is a non-event in her life. If anything, she got a clean car out of it, right? I said, imagine one of our hourly workers is driving that same road in her 15-year-old $800 car, and she blows her tire and damages her rim, and she doesn't have AAA. She can't afford it. She finally calls around and gets the car towed because she has to get it off the road and then taken to some mechanic. And she can't afford $35 to hire a taxi to get to work, so she calls her friends, and somebody finally picks her up and drops her off. And she gets to work 3 hours late, and she's told the supervisor he wants to see you. He's really mad. And she goes in and he reprimands her harshly, and he tells her that this is a strike against your record, and 2 more of these and you'll be out. It's a black mark, and you'll be fired. And at the end of all of that, he says, now go and answer the phones and be nice to our customers.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this woman's life is falling apart. She has $160 in the bank, and she has no idea how much this is going to cost. So it's going to be more than that. She doesn't know how she's going to get home, how she's going to get to work, how she's going to pick up or drop off her kids, etc. Her life is falling apart, and we're kicking her when she's down. Right.
And then expecting her to be nice to our customers, right?
Yeah. And the thing is that people are stoic and people are heroic. I mean, the fact is they come, they show up, they do their jobs. And for the most part, they do it well, right? Despite the burdens of all the things that they're carrying around. If you could see a thought bubble over everybody's head, what they are dealing with, outside of work and even at work, it would be heartbreaking. So then they started a program called Dream On, which is basically intended to help people in times of need. And so we're going to create a fund, and if you have a need like this, please, we don't want these small things to derail. So we want to do what we can to help. And for 10 days, nobody replied because people are stoic, right? And then they just they don't want to feel, they feel almost ashamed of asking for help, and they want to appear professional and strong. And then finally, after 10 days, a woman wrote in and said, "I'm so sorry." She started by saying, "I am sorry, but I need help. My ex-husband stopped paying alimony 2 weeks ago, and my children and I got evicted from our apartment last week. And I've been living in the car for a week now with my 2 kids. And I'm sorry, but I can't do this to them anymore. I just need help." And now John Ratliff sees this, and all he feels is a deep sense of shame. So what kind of a company am I running here? A mother who works here full time is homeless and cannot even let us know took her a week to just even tell us that. What kind of a leader am I? What kind of company is this? So of course, then they helped her right away. They got her into a hotel and they helped her get a new apartment. They did all the things, and they told her, we can keep this quiet. You don't have to tell anybody if you want to, preserve your privacy. She said, no, nobody has ever done anything this nice for me in my whole life. I'm going to tell everybody I know. So the word got out, and before you know it, the floodgates opened, and so many other stories came pouring out of suffering. And they could do something about that. And the thing is, over a period of a year or so, their turnover rate, which was 118%, went all the way down to, I believe, somewhere like 15%, 16%.
Right. So this is
You can
turnover in
imagine.
terms of staff turnover. So yeah.
Yeah. So you can imagine
but
the financial implications of that, right? So it's not like all of these things, they cost money, but it's really about, it's about caring. But they always end up being better for the business too. We don't do it for that reason. You do it for the right reasons because you want to care for people. But when you do that, other beautiful things also happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another story we have in the book is Greyston Bakery, which is a company here in Yonkers, New York, which is near New York City. Yonkers is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, but also has one of the highest rates of homelessness. And there was a Buddhist Zen master named Bernie Glassman who wanted to do something to help the homeless people and people in need. Right? So he's done many things for many people, but this was a particular passion of his to do something about this. So he wanted to give them a way out. If you look at the people who are at that level, a lot of them have drug addiction problems, but a lot of them also were incarcerated. They were caught up in the criminal justice system, which in the United States, I would say that is one of the black marks in this country, one of the sort of shadows that the United States has more prisoners per capita, and even in absolute numbers, than any other country in the world by far. Right? We're 5% of the world's population, maybe 20% of the world's prisoners. And a higher percent, 70 million Americans have some kind of a criminal record in their past. The same number that have a 4-year college degree. So the problem is vast, and then there's a box, there's a a box you have to tick, check mark, as to have you ever been arrested or convicted, etc. When you apply for a job, and if you check that, then typically you get screened out, right? So the doors are closed, and of course a lot of these people come from the minority communities, African American, etc. So what Bernie Glassman said, I want to give people a first chance. People don't even get a first chance in our country. Forget about a second chance because they're born in the ghettos. They have terrible schools. They're surrounded by drugs and violence. There's no hope. There's no future. And they get caught up as a matter of survival in doing these things. And then from that point on, their lives are essentially thrown away. So he said, I want to give them a first chance. So he created Greyston Bakery. He chose baking because something is a skill that can be taught relatively easily to anybody. And he created what he called open hiring. So basically, there's a list, you put your name on that list, they hire the next person, no background checks and no interviews. They'll train them for 9 months and then place them in a job. And then that gives them a step forward. And from that, then they can evolve into whatever else that they want to do. Right. So that's basically what Greyston has done. They said, we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. We hire people so that we can give them a start, a first chance towards evolving in their life. And that's, if you look at the stories of some of those people, who had been in jail multiple times, nobody would give them a job. They found Greyston. Now they, one of the people we talked to, Dion, he has a daughter, he has an apartment, he's a training supervisor, he makes $65,000 a year. His life has turned around. He had tears in his eyes as he spoke. He said, if it were not for this company, I would either be dead or I would be back in jail. So this is the power of business to heal. Right? And it's a multi-generational impact that we can have. We have another story in the book about Jaipur rugs, which is a similar story, but this is about the weavers and the untouchable community in India that make the carpets, and how those women are mistreated by everybody, including their parents and their husbands and their in-laws and the contractors, and they're abused, and exploited their whole life. And N.K. Chaudhary said, they're the innocents. I want to serve the innocent people, because they have never harmed anybody, and all they do is work hard and take care of other people. So they created a company where their well-being is at the center, and they're having a massive impact. 40,000 women and their children, multi-generations will be impacted by the way this business treats them and what it has done for them. So that's the power of Business, I believe business, we are here on this planet to care for each other. And business is a way we can do that at scale. So
Yeah.
if we start business with the right energy, which is about caring, it's about expressing myself and caring for others. Right? So finding my passion, my purpose, and doing that in a way that actually lifts other people up. If we do business with that energy, it becomes a healing activity. But if I use it as a way to serve myself and use other people, I use my employees, I exploit my customers, etc., to make money for myself, then I'm going to cause suffering. Right? So the
Yeah.
same exact business can be done with a different mindset and different energy behind it. One becomes a healing organization, the other one becomes a place of suffering. And that's what I think, that's the dominant model, unfortunately, right now in the world of business, is what causes suffering. I think we want to shift over to that other way of thinking and being.
Yeah. And I reflected as I was reading the book on, the company you're very close to, Whole Foods, and then Amazon. So Amazon is explicitly customer first, right? It's not a stakeholder business. It puts one class of people, their interest above all else. And Whole Foods has now become part of that. So it's interesting to me that a lot of our largest and most successful businesses right now aren't necessarily following that paradigm. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a matter of time, because that becomes your vulnerability, that becomes your Achilles heel. When your employees, I believe Amazon has made some strides in that direction. I think it has gotten better than what it used to be. Their warehouse working conditions, their leave policies for maternity, various things definitely have gotten better. Are they all the way there? No, I would want to see them do more. And the hope is that Whole Foods might be able to influence them a little bit. So it's a two-way influence. So this is a journey. Different companies are at different stages. Different companies have different blind spots. A lot of companies treat suppliers as sort of stepchild, stakeholders. But I think it's an evolution towards getting all of them in harmony that we are working towards.
And I think, and you talked about John Perkins has been a guest on the show, and you talk about him in the book, and you talk about if we had more time, I'd love to hear more about your expeditions with him. But he talks about this idea of dreaming a new dream, and you reference that in the book.
Yes.
And that to me came through powerfully. This idea that one of the ways we change business is to conceive of it differently, right? To dream a new dream.
Yeah, that idea comes from the native people of South America, right? The different tribes like the Achuar and the Zapara and so forth. The world is as you dream it, right? And so they place great power literally in dreams. Every night, every morning, they start their day with dream interpretation by the shamans. And they believe that they're receiving signals from somewhere about things, but also that everything we see around us started first in somebody's mind before it manifested out in the world. So what is and if we're not happy with what's out there, we need to dream a new dream. And that's, I think, what we're looking at today in business and in society generally, is that we had certain dreams and it's now manifested in what it is. But we're not happy with many aspects of it. So we need to go back and redream and then recreate from that, and dream in a way that is now not just rooted in self and material in short term, but actually more holistic, inclusive, long term.
Yeah.
Flourishing of all life. So I think that's what we have to do at this point.
A beautiful point to end the show. I know you need to get to your next appointment. For those who want to buy the book, The Healing Organization, fantastic. I thoroughly recommend it. Is there anywhere else you would send people who are interested in the themes we've discussed?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is, I believe, this month on Amazon, you can get the Kindle version just for $2, $1.95 or something. So, consciouscapitalism.org if you're interested in conscious capitalism as a movement, which is growing rapidly. And my website is rajsisodia.com.
Okay. Well, Raj, thank you so much once again. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. And
You're very welcome, Richard. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you.